Recently, Paradox Interactive released the long-awaited next installment of the Europa Universalis series, EU5. So naturally, I decided to instead try Victoria 3 for the first time. Overall, there's a lot going on, and while I don't normally enjoy playing games where I have to micromanage for hours on end to get anywhere, I surprisingly didn't feel totally overwhelmed in Victoria 3 like I remember feeling when I tried EU4 almost a decade ago. But some people are telling me Victoria 3 is more complicated than EU4, so I'm not sure if that's because 29-year-old me is different than 20-year-old me, and I need to revisit EU4, or if the gameplay just makes more sense to me in Victoria 3. In any case, I figured I can make a video on how historically accurate the Victoria 3 starting world map is. Firstly, I understand that as a game it would be unreasonable for me to expect the coastlines and borders to have the accuracy and precision of a detailed atlas or Google Earth. I also understand that the way the game functions means that there are logistically valid reasons to exclude certain things. So how this is going to work is I'll look at the map continent by continent and give an accuracy grade. Then average everything out GPA style to find a final world map grade. For those of you who are new to this channel, I am very picky about maps, but I will weigh inaccuracies differently and with nuance depending on whether they're more egregious or more of a nitpick. One problem universal throughout the entire map is admittedly based on how the game works. Nations are broken up into region pieces, and while they can swap between nations, it ultimately means a lot of these puzzle pieces are going to suspiciously have modern borders that make no sense for 1836. I do understand that since each region has slots for buildings, population, etc., that just making more regions for the sake of border accuracy would actually make some areas just more broken in the game, so it can't be the answer to everything, but I feel like it could be the answer in some areas. It is weird looking at Native American entities that just have the borders of modern Idaho, or Saharan African entities that have the modern African borders for like Mali, but even past the inaccuracy of that, it just sticks out to me and distracts me. Basically, every corner of the globe has this problem. Maybe you could fix this by somehow making more small regions, but hinder them slightly to keep the gameplay balanced. I don't know, I'm not a game designer, but hopefully there's a solution somewhere. Now, looking at North America, my first thought is that the United States, British Canada, and Mexico are way too big. I think it's great that any indigenous nations are included, and I understand you can't include them all, but in 1836 there was way more unseized indigenous land in both the United States and Canada at this time. Like, these areas in blue were still indigenous at the beginning in 1836. Mexico did not settle this much of the interior. Canada also had not yet seized that much land out west and north, minus tiny trading posts. There could be an Ojibwa nation, a Shoshone nation. A lot of missing potential here. Also, I can't help but notice that the naming is a bit inconsistent here. It's really cool that you called this group Niitsitapi instead of their Western given name of Blackfoot, same with calling the Nez Perce their proper name of Nimipu, but then these are still called the Sioux instead of Ochete Sakowing? I guess I just don't understand why you do the proper names for some of them and not all of them. Even if you want to argue more people know the name Sioux than Ochete Sakowing, I'd say the same is true for Nez Perce over Nimipu. If you're going to use indigenous names, you might as well go all the way. In the Caribbean, I also noticed that while Victoria 3 did properly show the Virgin Islands as Danish, the Dutch Caribbean colonies are completely missing, their northern possessions being made British and then giving Venezuela Aruba and Curacao. That definitely needs to be fixed. Overall, North America gets a C. South America has a lot of similar problems with North America, but not quite as egregious. Chile shouldn't control Araucania yet, for example. The Civil War front lines for Brazil are inaccurate, but this game can't show realistic front lines, so I'll give it a pass. As for the nation-state borders, everyone disputed everyone's border, so there's not going to be a satisfying solution. I think what they have here in terms of that area is about as good as it can get, so evening everything out, I think South America should get a solid B. Europe, of course, is all nation-states, but there are still some errors and nitpicks here. Germany is a bit ugly to look at, but I understand that it's unreasonable to include 40 different German states in such a small space. But one problem this game has, as well as Hearts of Iron 4, is taking some small areas and making them too big. Like, why does Bremen control all of that? Why is Gibraltar that big? You could argue maybe it's a game mechanics thing, like you need room to display certain graphical things or to make it easier to click on. But then you have tiny Dutch Luxembourg down here, tiny Schaumburg here, so it can clearly be done. And if you're able to accurately show tiny Dutch Luxembourg, then why not have Liechtenstein, San Marino, and Andorra? Also, showing British Heligoland Island would be neat too. It was quite an important bargaining chip for settling colonial disputes in Africa and Germany, and for a game centered around European colonial empire building, I'm kinda surprised it wasn't included. Overall, Europe gets a B+. Africa, oh boy. I know I acknowledged the whole modern borders thing earlier, but it's here where it's the most egregious and a lot harder to ignore. I don't even have the time to go over everything that's wrong here, and that's the stuff that I actually know is wrong here. In terms of what most egregiously stands out to me, Liberia not only did not have these borders yet, but at the time it wasn't even a unified entity yet, but rather multiple settler colonies. Spanish Ceuta and Melilla are too big, divided Ethiopia is also off, or at least off enough to stick out to me. Then why does the map show the Orange Free State and Transvaal Boer republics decades before they existed? I want to at least give some credit for showing a lot of African nations at all instead of just some weird blank space in the middle, but that's the bare minimum. All of the inaccuracies end up forcing me to give Africa a D. Hey, quick last minute interjection here. So after I recorded this, I was alerted to the dev diary for the game, and apparently they are in fact going to redo the map for Africa. Looking at what they've shown so far, I'm actually quite impressed that they addressed most of the problems I have. I'll link to the post below if you want to read more on it, because they even talk about how some inaccuracies are in fact game related, like one Boer Republic appears a year early just to avoid any nation tag related complications. This patch isn't out yet, so for now my original grade still stands, but once this patch is out, Africa might be bumped from a D to a C+, or maybe even a B- since they even removed several of the modern borders in the area. Kudos to the team working on this for making an effort. Seriously, it matters, and it's really cool to see. Back to the video. Asia, you have a mixed bag here. A lot of the same problems from the previous continents are here, but aren't quite as bad. The most inaccurate area is technically British India, but considering how insanely border gory it actually was at this time, I don't really blame them for simplifying it. I know I've already addressed the modern borders thing, but seeing it for the Himalayas and Arabia is distracting, at least for me. Southeast Asia definitely isn't perfect, but it's better than I thought it would be. Macau is way too big. Overall, though, I'd give Asia a C+. Oceania, meanwhile, is probably just as disappointing as Africa, yet sadly probably the one most people would overlook. As I brought up with the colonization in North America, British Australia just simply did not control this much of the interior in 1836. While having Aboriginal representation on the map is great, truth be told, there should be much more at this time period. If you can show all this in Africa, even if it's not perfect, you could at least show something better here. I also noticed that for some reason some of these Aboriginal groups aren't the name of the people so much as broader cultural groups. I understand if maybe you need to simplify things a little, you can't show everything, but Wati makes it seem like there was this giant singular tribe called Wati, when in reality it was a cultural block of sorts of 40 different distinct groups that weren't in any sort of political union. It'd be like if you put all the German states together and just called it Germany. You get it, but it's inaccurate. New Zealand, you have a similar issue with the Maori tribes, although at least they have the excuse of the northern island being tinier and more crowded with several overlapping groups, but then really disappointing was simplifying the remaining Pacific islands. This entire area was simply given to Tonga, even though many of these islands had their own distinct polities, most notably Samoa. Again, I understand that it's not the main focus of a game specifically about 19th century empire building, but I feel like if you can do this with Africa, you can do better with Oceania. Sure, the scramble for Africa was a big part of European colonial empire building, so it has a lot of focus. But so was the Pacific Ocean. Oceania gets a D+. So overall, what's Victoria 3's world map final grade? Well, if I treat the grades like a GPA and do the math, it gets a 2.15, which is a C. Don't get me wrong, it's gorgeous to look at aesthetically and nowhere close to the worst Paradox map. If anything, Paradox is actually getting better. But there's still a lot it can improve itself on, at least by my picky standards. If the average person learns a thing or two about nations they've never heard of, I guess that's a net positive. Anyway, if you'd like to see me do another video like this but for another map-based game, feel free to let me know in the comments. Then of course, since games cost money, supporting this channel is a great way to help keep it going. You can either support my Patreon or get my new German states calendar. Yes, the nerdiest calendar idea ever, with months dedicated to different 19th century German duchies and kingdoms. Get it while you still can, and thanks for watching.